Hi everyone, welcome back to Growing Up in Scientology. So I wanted to do a video real quick giving the homework that I do to come to the estimate of approximately 35,000 Scientologists in the entire world. And I wanted to do this video because this conversation comes up every now and then. And depending on what you look up on the internet, you'll see estimates anywhere from 15,000 to maybe 50,000. And the purpose of this video isn't to try and definitively nail down exactly where it is between 15 and 50, but more to just show that the number under no circumstances is going to be higher than 35. I mean, under no circumstances higher than 50, but you're going to see that even with my generous estimates, we don't come to more than 35. Anyone who has ever been on staff or in the Sea Org in the last 25 years can attest that these estimates I'm about to give, I'm going to break it down by category, I'm going to show my work, are generous. Even 35,000 Scientologists in the entire world, absolutely generous. So real quick, it breaks down to approximately 5,000 Sea Org members, 6,000 Class 5 staff members, estimated to be about 1,000 mission staff members, and about 23,000 public combined amongst Class 5 orgs, missions, and Sea Org orgs. The first category of Sea Org members that I've looked at here is the Sea Org service orgs. These are Sea Org organizations, so Scientology organizations staffed by Sea Org members that exist for the sole purpose of delivering Scientology to people who pay for it. The 10 Sea Org service orgs that I've got noted here in my little spreadsheet is the Flag Land Base, the Free Winds, AOLA, ASHO, LA Org, Celebrity Center International, AOSH UK, AOSH EU, AOSH ANZO, and the new AOSH Africa. Brand new, it's probably opening today, I think. I have 1,600 estimated Sea Org members in the Flag Land Base here in Clearwater. For those who care, I have estimated 1,000 specifically for the Flag Service Org, 350 for the Flag Crew Org, 100 for the FLB Org, 100 for CMO Clearwater, 25 for the IAS, and 25 for RTC, for an estimate of 1,600 Sea Org members at Flag. I've estimated 150 Sea Org members for the ship, 200 for AOLA, 200 for ASHO, 100 for LA Org, 150 for CCINT, 100 for AOSH UK, 100 for AOSH EU, 100 for AOSH ANZO, and 100 for AOSH Africa. These numbers are as close to accurate, leaning towards the generous side. The numbers could be a little lower. It's not likely they're going to be higher. If you're watching this video and somehow I have forgotten about a Sea Org service org, go ahead and note it in the comments down below and I'll update my spreadsheet. Okay, next category of Sea Org staff that I looked at was Sea Org Continental Management Units. In Scientology, the Continental Management Unit is called a CLO, a Continental Liaison Office, and you have one for West US, East US, Canada, Europe, ANZO, Latin America, and Africa. I'm not counting Taiwan. I'm not counting Russia. Okay, I have, just to keep it simple, estimated 50 Sea Org members staffed at each one of these CLOs. This does not include the CMO units attached to the CLOs. Of course, some of the continents are going to be more heavily staffed, like West US, for example. Some of the continents almost certainly have less than 50 Sea Org members. I'd be shocked if South Africa had 50 Sea Org members at the CLO. I'd be shocked if ANZO in Australia had more than 50 Sea Org members at the CLO. I'd be shocked if Canada had more than 50 Sea Org members at the CLO. 50 is very reasonable. Third category for Sea Org members, I looked at other Sea Org management units other than Continental management units. At the INT base, I'm currently estimating 500. The breakdown on that, and this is just kind of back of the envelope numbers. I'm estimating 50 staff members at INT for RTC, 100 for CMO INT, 300 for Gold, and 50 for the International Management Executive Committee and correlated staff members. I realize these numbers are likely to be a little high, but I'd almost rather be generous, just to show that even being generous, we do not get to more than 35,000 Scientologists in the entire world. For, well, this next entity is known by different names depending on when you were last in the Sea Org and Scientology. The entity that is contained in the HGB, the Hollywood Guarantee Building on Hollywood, has been known as the FCB. It's been known as the FLO. It's currently known as the ILO, the Int Liaison Office. I'm estimating 300 Sea Org members posted in the ILO. That includes the Flag Bureau, that includes marketing, that includes the landlord office. It's not going to be more than 300, I do not believe. I'm estimating 150 Sea Org members at the Scientology Media Productions facility, the old KCAT studios on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. I am estimating 100 Sea Org members at Bridge Publications. For New Era Publications, which is basically Bridge Publications but for Europe, I'm estimating 75 Sea Org staff. For ASI, Author Services, this is L. Ron Hubbard's literary agency. Got a big giant building right on Hollywood and La Brea. I'm estimating 50 staff at ASI. I'm estimating 25 staff at CST. Technically, that's not a management entity, but it is located within the world of international management, kind of. The last segment that I've looked at here for Sea Org members is CMO units. So CMO is the Commodore's Messengers Organization. Just to keep it simple, CMO's job is to manage the people who are managing. We're gonna leave it at that. Okay, so the CMO Continental units, I have West US, the Free Winds, East US, Canada, Europe, ANZO, Latin America, Africa, and IXU. I'm estimating 50 CMO staff in West US, 30 CMO staff on the ship, 25 CMO staff in East US, 25 in Canada, 25 in Europe, 25 in ANZO, 25 in Latin America, 25 in Africa, and 50 at IXU in the HGB building. If you are watching this video and you have specific knowledge that these numbers should be higher or lower, definitely please comment below and I will update the spreadsheet. Class 5 staff is our next category. I said approximately 6,000. The exact number I'm working with here is 6,125, and here's how I arrive at that. 175 orgs is the number that I'm using for orgs. So I remember the exact number of orgs was somewhere between 175 and 190. But that includes Day and Foundation orgs. And one of the things that's happened over the last 15 years is a lot of Day and Foundation orgs have been combined. Also, a lot of the Celebrity Center orgs have been shut down and combined with their local Class 5 orgs. So there is no CC Nashville, for example. There is no CC Portland. There is no CC Dusseldorf, to the best of my knowledge. I think there's still a CC New York, but I can't swear to it. Because I don't know exactly how many of the Day Foundation orgs have been combined, I'm just using 175 because it's not far from the actual number. So if we say 175 orgs, now I am using as an average, I'm just gonna take 175 orgs times an average number of staff members. And I'm using 35 staff members per org. The point of doing this estimate this way is not to make a claim that I believe 35 is the exact average number of staff members per org. I just think it's a fair and possibly generous average. I know there are orgs that have over 50 staff. There might be a couple orgs that have over 100 staff, maybe one or two. There are certainly orgs that have 10 or 15 staff. 175 orgs, using an estimate of an average of 35 staff members per org, that gives us 6,125 Class 5 staff members. So if we estimate number of public on lines at Class 5 orgs, again, I've taken 175 orgs and I'm estimating 100 public per org. For a lot of orgs, 100 is a high number. I want to be clear that this is not an estimate of how many public went into an org and actually put in 2.5 hours of study time that week or got an auditing session that week. This estimate should not be confused with the bodies in the shop statistic. Bodies in the shop, or BIZ, is the statistic that an org uses for basically how many people walked into our door and did Scientology this week. I am not saying that your average org has a BIZ of 100. I'm saying that around every Class 5 org, I believe on average, you could probably find 100 people in that surrounding city or surrounding state. Maybe a third of the states in the US don't even have a Class 5 org. That you could probably find 100 people in the field belonging to that org who, even if they have not been into the org in a year, identify as a Scientologist who is a member of the Church of Scientology. Again, it's an estimate. And the purpose of doing it this way is so that people can see how I arrived at the number. They can make their own decisions about whether the number should be a bit higher or a bit lower, but you'll see we're being quite fair and we still don't break 35,000. So if we say average of 35 staff at each Class 5 org, average of 100 public at each Class 5 org, now let's look at the missions. Okay, the missions, it's hard to get transparency on the missions. I'm estimating about 150 missions in the entire world. There are almost no missions in the United States. Even if you go online and you see that, oh, there's a mission in my city, go check it out. There's probably not. Most missions have closed down. A lot of missions is just it's someone's house. Even if they have hours that they're open, there's nobody there. No one's coming to take a course. No one's getting any auditing. Anyone who's been in Scientology knows of the big missions. Los Feliz. There's probably some missions up in Mountain View. You've got the Bel Air mission here in Clearwater. There's a whole lot of missions in Russia. Missions are just not that big in Scientology anymore. So I'm estimating 150 missions. I'm estimating 25 public per mission. That does not mean 25 people taking a course at a mission every week. Out of all the numbers I've worked with here, this is probably the most generous. There probably are not 150 missions. There probably are not 25 people around each mission who identify as a Scientologist, who is a member of the proper, Church of Scientology. But even then, 150 missions times 25 public per mission is only 3,750 Scientologists. And so, even though this number could go up or down pretty easily, we're not dealing with a lot of people. If we look at mission staff and we take that 150 number and we use that average, for the missions, we'll use an average of 5 staff members per mission. That's probably high, but let's just use it. 5 staff members per mission, 150 missions in the world, 750 staff. Whether this number goes up or down, we're not dealing with a lot of people. So for org public, if you've got 175 orgs, at estimating 100 public per org, you've got 17,500 public in the Class 5 world. If you've got 150 missions, estimating 25 public per mission, you've got 3,750 public in the mission world. And for SO orgs, and again, this is another place where I'm just being generous, we've got 10 SO service orgs. Let's just say 150 public per org. Now, if I've already used 100 public for Class 5 orgs, then maybe 150 public for a Sea Org seems low. But the thing is, there is huge overlap between the public in the Class 5 world and the public in the Sea Org world. In fact, the overlap is almost absolute. But, just to be fair and to estimate on the generous side, I'm, for the purpose of these calculations, saying 150 unique public around each Sea Org that doesn't also show up on the statistics in the Class 5 world. And that gives us another 1,500 public for Sea orgs. So if we summarize all that up, 4,630 Sea Org members, 6,125 Class 5 staff members, 750 mission staff members, and a combined 22,750 public, for a total of 34,255 Scientologists. That's in the entire world. Some other comments about this. Narconon staff do not count on this number and should not be counted on this number, nor should people who do the Narconon program. And the reason is Scientology doesn't consider Narconon staff to be Scientology staff. A staff member at a Narconon is still considered a public at whatever that person's nearest org or mission is. So anyone who exists in the Narconon world is still being captured in this estimate. There's some other data points that I want to address to show how they compare to the estimates we're talking about here. Okay, so there's one data point that exists from Mark Headley, who spent a lot of time at Golden Era Productions at Int Management. And Golden Era Productions produces all of the e-meters that are used in Scientology auditing. And Mark has said that only 30,000 Mark 7 e-meters were ever produced. This should not be confused with being indicative of 30,000 Scientologists. Not all Scientologists are required to own an e-meter. Only trained auditors are required to own an e-meter. They're supposed to own 2. Everybody knows that most auditors don't own 2. So you could say that if Gold produced 30,000 e-meters, they estimated that would cover 15,000 auditors. There's nowhere near 15,000 people who have completed auditor training in Scientology since 1996. I'm throwing that date out because that's when everybody was required to start redoing their auditor training. What's interesting about the 30,000 number, and if you have it, because every auditor is technically supposed to have 2 meters, what's interesting about that number is it's still within the realm of the numbers that we're talking about. One of the most reliable data points I've heard, I believe it was from Mike Rinder, or even Jeff Hawkins actually, was that back in the day, early 90s, 100,000 was the high water mark for how many either active Scientologists there were or people with active memberships in the International Association of Scientologists. And so there was never more than 100,000 Scientologists at one time. And if we say that it's come down now to about 35, perhaps even lower, you can see how strange it is that this group advertises itself as the fastest growing religion in the world. As a follow-on to this e-meter number, there was a quote, I think this is from something Tony Ortega published. I'm reading this off of Reddit. It says, I told Headley that his story implied that Miscavige himself knew there were only about 15,000 Scientologists around the world with the money or the desire to pay for the machines. And then Mark responded, the actual number is more like 10,000. And I wanted to address this quote because I think this quote could easily be misunderstood to mean that Mark was saying the actual number of Scientologists was closer to 10,000. But really, we have to look at this. When Tony says this implies there were only about 15,000 Scientologists around the world with the money and the desire to pay for the machines, you need usually more than just the money and the desire to buy an e-meter. If you're not actually starting auditor training, which very few public do auditor training, you're just not going to buy an e-meter. You don't usually buy the e-meter until you're like starting your auditor training. So I just wanted to clarify that. Even Mark's quote here should not be taken to mean he was saying there's only 10,000 Scientologists. And again, the point in all these numbers isn't to nitpick on whether it's 10, 15, 25, 35, or 50. It's just to show that the church claims 8 to 10 million Scientologists in the world, and I'm doing my best here to be generous on these estimates, and we don't get to 35,000. There's also another interesting data point out here from Paul Burkhart. I believe Paul worked in central marketing, and he said that in 2006, 2007, the church was working from a database of about 180,000 people. Now realize that that's 180,000 people who have ever walked into a church of Scientology, paid for something, and done something. It doesn't mean that person ever considered themselves a Scientologist. It doesn't mean that that person ever stayed for more than one day. That gives you an interesting number to work with there. Only 180,000 people were even on their central list that they were using. Around this time, 2006, 7, and 8, Scientology went through this whole evolution of re-releasing huge amounts of books and lectures. I don't want to get into a full explanation of it, but there was a real intense hard sell program being run for years and years and years to get all Scientologists to buy this whole new set of books and lectures for $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, something like that. Paul, this was as of 2013, said after 6 or 7 years of trying to sell these things to anybody that would buy them, they had only sold 8,000 sets. That's an interesting number. Something to consider there is that if you have a family of 7 people who consider themselves a Scientologist, that household is not likely to own more than 1 or 2 sets of this books and lecture package. On the other hand, you have some very wealthy Scientologists who might have bought 20, 50, 100 sets of these things. So it's just something to consider. I'm mentioning this because it would be a mistake to think that because they sold 8,000 sets of these books and lectures, that meant there was 8,000 Scientologists. It doesn't really work out that way. There was a recent census done in Australia to estimate the number of Scientologists. I have always wondered how these censuses can ever attempt to arrive at an accurate number when you're talking about such small numbers. But I still think it's interesting to compare the estimates that we're discussing right now to the Australian census. So in 2016, Australia did a census and determined there were 1,681 Scientologists in Australia. So the estimates I'm using imply only 865 Scientologists in Australia. So to break that down, there are 4 Class 5 organizations in Australia: Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney, and Perth. So if we say 35 staff members each, 100 public each, just estimating. There's 1 Sea or Gorg, AOSH, ANZO. So if we say 100 staff and 100 Sea Org members and 150 public. And then there's a CLO, so 50 Sea Org members, they don't deliver to public. And there's a CMO unit. So let's say 25 Sea Org members in the CMO unit. And so we come to just estimating 865. So the reason I think it's interesting that what I believe are the real numbers, is only half of the Australian census numbers is just to push back a little bit on what I know is going to be a criticism of this video, that I'm wildly overestimating my numbers. I'm coming in at half what the Australian census came in at for Australia. So just want to point that out. As I mentioned before, I have not included any breakout for Russia or a breakout for Taiwan. Now, I will say that the orgs in Russia and the org in Taiwan are included in my 175 org estimate. There are probably, the missions in Russia are much bigger than the missions outside of Russia, and that's fine. That's one of the reasons why I used the estimates that I did. It's one of the reasons why my numbers might sound a little high for the mission network, is I probably haven't given Russia everything it is due. And Taiwan is a small market for Scientology. They do have a Continental management office there. They do have a Class 5 organization there. It's one org. Who cares? It doesn't need to be broken out. Also, I want to mention the church likes to use this number, something like 3,500 churches, missions, and groups, or something like this. Groups don't count. Here's why. The church counts a group as like just some dude that says, yay, I'm a Way to Happiness group now. Or yay, I'm an Applied Scholastics tutor now. Therefore, I'm a group. Some guy, some Scientologist, signs up to be a Dianetics group and never does anything. The reason these don't count is that just because someone is active in a group doesn't make them a Scientologist. So like if I start a Way to Happiness group and I recruit some unsuspecting people in my neighborhood to pass out Way to Happiness books because I've convinced them it's got nothing to do with Scientology, that doesn't make them Scientologists. And just because I give someone a Way to Happiness book doesn't make that person a Scientologist. Just because a person gives tutoring to somebody does not make the person tutored now a Scientologist. And the real point of all of this is any of the activity that Scientology would like to say is happening in these groups is accounted for in my estimates on Sea Org orgs, orgs, and missions. If you are not involved with a Scientology mission or an org or a Sea Org org, you're not a Scientologist. None of these group numbers have anything to do with anything. All right, that's everything I can think of to say about this subject right now. I had a few conversations with people recently who I had posted somewhere this breakdown, and they said they thought it was helpful to see how the estimate was arrived at. That's why I wanted to do this video. The point isn't that my estimate has to be the right one, but if people can see how I've arrived at this estimate, they can decide how they want to tweak the numbers or where they think I have it wrong. Even being as generous as I have been here, you'll see there's just no way in hell there's more than 35,000 Scientologists in the entire world. And here's why this is important. People get a very overinflated idea of the size and influence of Scientology. And when I am speaking privately with some community leaders here in the Tampa Bay area, with some local politicians, this is a point that I try to make as often as I can. And I think there is value in the public at large really getting that. I feel like Scientology continues to capitalize on a reputation it legitimately earned 20, 25, 30, 40 years ago. They used to be an organization that would go and stop at nothing to ruin its critics. And I don't think anything has changed in the DNA of the organization. I still think they wish they could get away with doing that, but they simply can't. There's just too many people that have left Scientology and have spoken out about the abuses internally. And there's just too many people. There's strength in numbers. Scientology, as much money as they have, they don't have the human capital to be able to manage enough private investigators to go around and harass people. Politically, they don't have the clout they would like people to believe that they have. Socially, civically, they have nowhere near the numbers it would take to get anything done. The Church of Scientology has never been able to get any Scientologist elected to any political position in Clearwater or any of the cities in the Tampa Bay area. And I think people should really take a moment to think about that. It's very easy for people to say Scientology runs this city. I say this city, I live in Clearwater. It's just not true. They don't run shit. What they own is a lot of real estate. They own a lot of real estate. And they've got a handful of local business leaders and a few local politicians who I believe are under the incorrect assumption that the Church of Scientology is something to be feared. And every opportunity I get, I'm explaining to people how that is simply not true. If you're watching this video, again, I know I repeat myself, but if you're watching this video and you have any feedback, educated feedback, please, educated feedback about how these numbers should be changed, please do leave it in the comments. That's all I got for now. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.
Okay, if you want to see my rock and roll songs, click right on this guitar. And if you want to see a different one of my videos, then you could click right inside here. If